my retirement party, my daughter-in-law walked in wearing my dress, and in that single moment, I realized something I was never meant to know. Before we begin, I'm truly glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story travels. I never imagined that the night meant to celebrate my life's work would be the night my world collapsed. After 35 years as a nurse, caring for patients, healing wounds, comforting families, I thought I'd earned a peaceful ending. The hospital's conference room was decorated in blue and white streamers, my favorite colors. Laughter filled the air as my colleagues, people who had become family, gathered around the cake that read, "Happy Retirement, Bula." For a moment, I felt truly proud. At 58, I was ready to start a new chapter. Gardening, reading, maybe traveling with my husband Gerald, just as we'd always dreamed. But then, she walked in. Freya, my daughter-in-law. She looked radiant, confident, and she was wearing a midnight blue silk dress I knew by heart. Every pearl button, every delicate line of lace, it was unmistakable. It was my mother's dress. The very same one she wore to her own retirement party 28 years ago, before illness took her life. I had kept that dress wrapped in tissue and cedar, safe for decades. It was more than clothing, it was a memory. And tonight it was supposed to be my turn to wear it. But Freya had told me earlier, so casually, "You should wear something light, Bula, the beige one Gerald picked for you." I hadn't thought much of it then. Now I understood. She hadn't asked. She had simply taken it from my closet. And as she glided through the crowd, smiling, owning the room, I felt something inside me crack. She didn't just borrow a dress, she claimed a piece of my history. "Doesn't Freya look stunning tonight?" Gerald's voice came from beside me, filled with admiration that once belonged only to me. My husband of 30 years, who had held me through my mother's funeral, who knew exactly what that dress meant, was glowing as he watched her. And then I saw it. A brief glance between them, 3 seconds, maybe less, but it told me everything. Her slight tilt of the head, his eyes lingering just a moment too long. A secret smile exchanged before they both looked away. The sound of glass shattering startled the room. My champagne flute had slipped from my hand and hit the floor, splintering into 100 pieces just like my heart. "Mom, are you okay?" My son David rushed over, concern etched across his face. My sweet boy, the one who worked 2 jobs to support Freya's lavish tastes, the one who had no idea that the 2 people he trusted most were quietly breaking his world apart. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I lied, forcing a smile that hurt to hold. As I bent to pick up the shards, I saw Gerald's hand rest gently on Freya's back. Protective. Familiar. And the way she leaned into his touch for just a second too long confirmed what I already knew. They weren't just sharing glances. They were sharing a secret. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I laughed, smiled, thanked everyone. But behind every polite nod, I was memorizing details. Every touch, every whisper, every look. And then, near the end of the evening, Freya approached me. She smiled sweetly, the kind of smile that hides the sharpest truth, and said, "I hope you don't mind about the dress, Bula. I found it in your closet, and it just called to me. Your mother had such wonderful taste." Her words were soft. Her meaning was not. She knew exactly what she was doing, exactly how much it would hurt. And at that moment, I understood this wasn't just betrayal. It was a performance, and I had been the last to see the script. This wasn't carelessness. It wasn't an accident. It was a message. When I met her gaze, those clear blue eyes that once seemed so gentle when David first brought her home, I saw something different this time, something sharp, calculated. She wanted me to see, to understand that she could take anything of mine she desired, even the man I built my life with, and in her mind, there was nothing I could do to stop her. That's when I reached into my purse and pulled out the envelope, cream-colored, heavy paper, the kind that feels final. I'd been carrying it for weeks, waiting for the right moment, though I never imagined this would be it, surrounded by laughter and champagne at what was supposed to be my celebration. "Gerald," I said softly, my voice cutting through the chatter like a scalpel. He turned from the refreshment table, probably ready for another quiet moment with Freya, until he saw what I was holding. In an instant, the color drained from his face. "I think it's time you open this." The room didn't fall silent right away. It was more like a wave one conversation after another fading out as people felt the tension between us. Gerald's hands trembled as he reached for the envelope, and for the first time that night, I saw fear flash across Freya's perfect smile. They had underestimated me. They thought I was the gentle wife who would never question, never fight back. They thought years of caring for others had made me soft. They had no idea what I'd been preparing for. But I wasn't going to let the truth explode in a crowded room, not yet. Not with my son standing there, confusion in his eyes. "Not here," I said quietly, taking the envelope back. "This is a family matter." The drive home felt endless. Gerald sat stiff beside me, glancing over like he was afraid I might shatter. In the rearview mirror, I could see Freya's car following close behind, her hands moving wildly as she no doubt tried to convince David that I'd lost control. She had no idea how calm I actually was, because this moment... I'd planned it down to the last detail. It had started 6 months earlier, with something as small as laundry. I was folding Gerald's shirts when I found a receipt in his pocket. Dinner for 2 at Romano's, our special restaurant, on a Tuesday night when he'd told me he was working late. The bill was over $100, far too much for a business dinner. At first I made excuses for him. Maybe it was a client, maybe he'd taken David out. But something didn't feel right, like a patient's symptoms that just don't fit the usual diagnosis. So I started paying attention. I noticed how his phone was always face down now, how he began showering as soon as he came home, how suddenly he cared about his appearance, new clothes, new cologne, even morning jogs he'd never taken before. And then there was Freya. Her visits became more frequent after Gerald's early retirement last year, always perfectly timed for when David was at work. But the night I knew, truly knew, came 3 months ago. Margaret, my book club friend, had canceled last minute with a migraine, so instead of chatting over cheese and wine, I drove home early around 7:30. Gerald's car was in the driveway. Nothing strange about that. But a few houses down, hidden behind the Johnson's oak tree, was Freya's silver Honda. My heart pounded. I slipped quietly into the house through the garage. Voices drifted from the living room. Low, intimate, with a kind of laughter I hadn't heard from Gerald in years. "She's so oblivious." Freya's voice floated down the hall, soft and melodic but edged with poison. "Sometimes I think she actually enjoys being the devoted wife, always taking care of everyone while her husband finds happiness elsewhere." I froze. Gerald's response was muffled, but I caught enough. "After the retirement party, we won't have to pretend much longer." They spoke about me like I was already gone, like my life had already been erased from their future. That night, after Freya slipped out the back door and Gerald pretended he'd spent the evening watching TV alone, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and made my decision. No screaming, no tears, just precision. 35 years as a nurse had taught me exactly what to do: observe, record, prepare a treatment plan. The next morning, I hired a private investigator. His name was Marcus Webb, a former police detective who now specialized in uncovering hidden relationships. He had that calm, steady presence I knew so well from my years in hospitals, the kind professionals use when they must deliver painful truths. "I need to know everything," I told him during our first meeting at a quiet coffee shop across town. "How long it's been happening, what they're planning, and whether my son knows." Marcus was efficient. Within 2 weeks, he'd documented 17 private meetings between Gerald and Freya. Hotels, restaurants, even inside our own house, the home they thought I'd never return to unexpectedly. The photographs were crisp, professional, and devastating. Gerald's hand resting on Freya's leg at a restaurant booth, a kiss in the parking lot of a hotel, Freya leaving our home at noon on a Tuesday, the same day she'd told David she was out shopping with friends. But then Marcus uncovered something far worse than the affair itself. "Mrs. Morrison," he said quietly one afternoon, sliding a folder across the table as if handling something fragile. "I think you need to see this." Inside were documents I'd never seen before. Bank statements showing transfers from our joint savings into an account with Freya's name on it, and real estate papers that showed the deed to our home, the house Gerald and I bought 30 years ago, the place where we raised our son, had been quietly transferred to Freya's sole ownership. Gerald hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. He'd been dismantling my future piece by piece. When did these transfers happen? I asked, forcing my voice to stay steady though my hand trembled. "The property transfer was finalized 2 weeks ago," Marcus replied softly. "The bank withdrawals have been happening over the last 8 months, small amounts, spaced out to avoid detection." 8 months. While I was planning my retirement party and dreaming of traveling together, Gerald had been preparing to disappear and take everything with him. But Marcus wasn't finished. "There's more," he said, opening another section of the folder. "Your daughter-in-law has been meeting with a divorce attorney, one who specializes in protecting assets when one spouse holds significant wealth." I felt the world tilt around me. This wasn't a love affair, it was a plan. Cold, careful, and financial. I wasn't a wife in their story anymore. I was an obstacle. So now, sitting in our living room, facing Gerald, David, and Freya, I felt none of the panic they expected, only clarity. They sat across from me, unaware that every smile, every excuse, every secret had already been documented. Gerald kept glancing at the envelope in my hands, a sheen of sweat forming on his forehead despite the cool air. "Beulah," he began cautiously, "maybe we should talk about this privately." "No," I interrupted, my voice firm. "David deserves to know what kind of woman he married. Don't you think it's time for honesty in this family?" Freya gave a bright, practiced laugh. "Really, Beulah? You're being dramatic. Whatever you think you know." I opened the envelope. The first photograph slid free, Gerald and Freya kissing in the parking lot of the Comfort Inn. The timestamp in the corner read last Tuesday, the exact day David was at work and I was at my doctor's appointment. Silence filled the room, so heavy I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, every second marking the end of the life we'd all pretended to share. The photo landed on the coffee table with a soft thud that might as well have been thunder. For a moment, no one moved. David's expression shifted in slow motion, confusion, disbelief, then a dawning realization that shattered my heart all over again. "Mom," he whispered. His voice was small, fragile, the same voice he'd used as a child when something terrible had happened, when he still believed I could fix everything. Gerald lunged forward, reaching for the photo. "Beulah, please, you don't understand?" "Don't." The word came out sharper than I intended, but it stopped him cold. It was a tone I'd used only in emergencies, the one that saved lives in hospital rooms when mistakes weren't an option. Freya was the first to recover, which told me exactly how prepared she'd been for this moment. "David, honey," she began softly, "this isn't what it looks like. Your mother's just under stress. Retirement can be hard. Maybe she's confused. Stop." The word came from David, quiet, but with a weight that silenced the room. "Just stop, Freya." My gentle son, who'd never raised his voice in his life, was looking at his wife with eyes full of quiet rage and disbelief, and in that instant, I saw it. The truth finally breaking through the web of lies they'd spun. David picked up the photograph with steady hands. He studied it like a man trying to memorize every painful detail. The timestamp was clear. Tuesday, October 15th, 2:47 p.m. I knew he'd never forget that date. It was the day he'd worked a double shift at the warehouse. The same day Freya had told him she was visiting her sister in Phoenix. "How long?" he asked, his voice calm, but shaking at the edges. Gerald cleared his throat, trying to summon the authority he once carried in this house. "Son, this is between your mother and me. You don't need to—" "How long?" David repeated, quieter now, and somehow that made it even more terrifying. How long have you been betraying me with my wife? Silence. It stretched so wide I could hear everything. Mrs. Patterson's dog barking 3 houses down, the hum of our refrigerator, my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. 8 months, I said finally, when it became clear neither of them would speak. At least 8 months that I can prove. David gave a hollow laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere past heartbreak. Our first anniversary was 9 months ago, he whispered. He turned to Freya, whose flawless makeup could no longer hide how pale she'd become. So, you've been lying to me for almost our entire marriage. David, please, let me explain, Freya began, but I stopped her. I placed another sheet of paper on the table. It wasn't a photo this time, it was a bank statement. A record of $25,000 transferred from our joint savings into an account under her name. The date? 6 weeks ago. Right after I'd mentioned wanting to take that long-promised cruise to Alaska. Gerald's face turned ashen. How did you get that? The same way I got these. I spread out the rest of the documents like playing cards in a game where I held every winning hand. Bank transfers, $87,000 in total over 8 months. Credit card records showing lavish dinners, hotel stays, jewelry I'd never seen. And finally, the paper that made Gerald sink back into his chair as if the air had been pulled from the room, the deed transfer for our house. You put our home in her name, I said, my voice steady even as fury burned behind it. The home we bought when David was 2, the place I've kept for 30 years. You signed it over to your son's wife without telling me. David stared at the document, his hands trembling. Dad, he said, his voice cracking, tell me this isn't real. Tell me you didn't take Mom's house and give it to her. It's not stealing, Gerald murmured weakly. It's protecting assets. If there were a separation, the house would stay safe. Safe for who? David's voice broke. Safe for the woman who's been lying to me since the day we got married? Safe for you and her while Mom's left with nothing? Freya finally found her voice, sharp, desperate. You don't understand the whole situation. Your father and I, we have a connection. We understand each other in ways you never could. David stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. You understand each other so well, he said, pacing like a trapped animal, that you decided to steal from my mother? You understand each other so well that you spent nights in hotel rooms while I worked double shifts to pay for your designer clothes? I watched my son's world collapse in real time. And part of me ached for him. But he deserved the truth. He deserved to see exactly who he'd married, and what his father had become. There's more, I said quietly. 3 pairs of eyes turned toward me, heavy with dread. More, Gerald whispered. I reached into the envelope again, but this time I didn't take anything out. I just held it there, letting them wonder what else I might know. What other secrets I'd uncovered with the same precision I once used to chart a patient's recovery. The house transfer can be reversed, I said evenly, looking directly at Gerald. I know about it now, which means I can contest it. Fraudulent asset transfer without spousal consent. My lawyer says it's an easy win. Your lawyer? Freya's voice cracked, the first hint of real fear in it. Oh, yes, I replied calmly. I've had legal counsel for months. It's amazing what you can accomplish once you stop wasting energy on a marriage that quietly died 8 months ago. For the first time in a year, I felt calm. Truly calm. You see, I continued, leaning back in my chair, I may have been naive about my husband's character, but I'm not naive about my rights. Gerald tried one final time to sound reasonable. Bula, we can fix this. We don't need lawyers. There's no reason to make this ugly. I laughed, and it surprised me how genuine it sounded. Ugly? Gerald, you've been siphoning our savings for months while spending your time with our son's wife. You let her wear my mother's dress to my retirement party like it was some kind of trophy. Tell me, how could it possibly get uglier than that? And that's when I saw it, a flicker in Freya's expression. Not guilt, not fear. Something else entirely, a shift I hadn't expected, as if a new game had just begun. The mask finally slipped. Gone was the soft, innocent act, and in its place stood the calculating woman she truly was. She'd been caught, cornered, and now she was ready to strike back with whatever ammunition she had left. "You think you're so clever," Freya said, her voice suddenly low, almost casual. "You think you've uncovered everything, but you have no idea what you're really dealing with." David turned toward her, confused but wary. There was something in her tone, something he'd probably heard before, but never recognized for what it was. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked. Freya's smile sharpened like glass. "It means your precious mother isn't the innocent victim she's pretending to be. Go on, Bula. Tell them about the pills." My blood went cold. Her words hung in the air like poison, heavy and deliberate. I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, the same feeling I used to get when a patient's condition suddenly turned. But after 35 years in medicine, I knew something Freya didn't. People who think they hold the upper hand often forget the person across from them understands the game better than they ever will. "The pills," she repeated, louder now, confidence creeping back into her tone. "Go ahead, Bula. Tell David and Gerald about your little prescription problem." David's brow furrowed in confusion. "What pills? Mom, what is she talking about?" I could feel Gerald's eyes on me, hoping, perhaps, that Freya had just handed him a lifeline from the wreckage of what we'd uncovered, but I stayed perfectly calm. "I think Freya should explain what she means," I said softly, "since she seems to know so much about it." Her smile widened. She thought she was about to win. "Your mother has been stealing medication from the hospital," Freya began confidently. "Oxycodone, Percocet, Ativan. I caught her with an entire bottle she took from the pharmacy. She's been using them for months, maybe even selling them." The accusation was so absurd that for a split second I almost laughed. Almost. But then I saw it, the flicker of doubt in my son's eyes. That was her goal all along. This wasn't desperation. It was strategy. Freya had been saving this lie for the exact moment she'd need it. "That's a serious accusation," Gerald said slowly. And I heard it, that note of hope in his voice. If her story were true, then maybe he wasn't the only villain here. Maybe I was just as bad. "It's also completely false," I replied evenly, reaching into my purse for my phone. "But what's really interesting, Freya, is how you know about it, since it never happened." Her confidence faltered, if only for a heartbeat. But she pressed on. "I have photos," she insisted. "I documented everything because I was worried about you. I thought David should know." "Show me." The two words stopped her cold. "What?" "Show me the photos. Show me this evidence you say you have." I raised my phone, the screen already lit. "Because I have photos too. Would you like to see them?" I swiped once. The first image appeared on screen. Freya at a CVS pharmacy counter talking to a young man behind the register. The timestamp, 2 months ago, during one of her so-called shopping trips with friends. "That's Tommy Hriss," I said conversationally. "He's a pharmacy technician, or at least he was. He's also been under investigation for selling restricted medication illegally for the past year. I know this because I reported him to the authorities 3 weeks ago." The color drained from Freya's face so fast I thought she might faint. "You see, Freya," I continued calmly, "after 35 years as a nurse, you develop connections. Nurses, doctors, pharmacists, investigators. We talk. We share information about suspicious behavior. And when someone starts asking questions about my medical record, I tend to hear about it." I swiped again. The next photo showed Freya exchanging cash for a small bottle in the parking lot. "Here's where it gets even more interesting," I said evenly. "When I heard rumors about my supposed prescription problem, I decided to follow the trail. Turns out you were the one making illegal purchases." David stared at his wife, his expression a mix of disbelief and anger. "Freya, what is she talking about?" "Tommy Hriss has been very cooperative with the investigation," I continued, my tone still steady, professional. He's already provided a complete list of his sales from the past year. Your wife's name appears 18 times, buying restricted medication without prescriptions. Total street value, around $4,000. Gerald looked pale. That's a federal offense. Yes, I said simply. It is. I swiped once more. Another photo appeared. Freya in a different parking lot, meeting another man. You weren't just buying them for yourself, were you? My voice stayed soft, almost clinical. You were reselling them. Marcus, my investigator, followed you to multiple transactions. That's how you were paying for those fancy dinners and hotel rooms with my husband. The room went silent, completely silent. David sank into a chair, his head in his hands. Gerald was staring at Freya like she was someone he'd never met before, and in a way, he hadn't. That's not, Freya began weakly, but her voice cracked halfway through. That's not what, sweetheart? I asked, my tone cutting but calm. Not true? Not what you planned? Not how you imagined this night would go? I stood and walked slowly to the window, the same window I'd looked out of for 30 years, watching this neighborhood grow, this family unravel, the same home Gerald had tried to take from me. And for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. You see, I began, turning back toward them, when I hired Marcus to investigate the affair, I didn't just ask him to find proof of betrayal. I asked him to find out everything. Who you really are, Freya. What kind of person seduces her father-in-law, tears apart a family, and still manages to look in the mirror every morning? I paused, letting the silence hang between us. The drug-dealing part, I added, was honestly a surprise. I thought you were just a gold digger. I had no idea you were this entrepreneurial. David finally lifted his head. His face looked hollow, older. Is this why you married me? He asked, voice raw. To get close to Dad? To get access to my mother's money? Freya's expression hardened, all pretense gone. Your father is a weak, pitiful man who was starving for attention, she said flatly. And your mother? She's a fool. She trusted everyone, and that makes her easy to use. You're all so simple to control, it's almost boring. The cruelty in her voice was breathtaking, calm, deliberate, almost bored. For the first time, she wasn't even pretending to be anything else. But you made one mistake, I said quietly, pulling the final document from my envelope. You assumed I wouldn't fight back. You thought 35 years of caring for people made me weak. I unfolded the paper slowly. This, I said, is a court order, signed this morning. Freya's eyes widened as I read the words aloud. Effective immediately, you are prohibited from coming within 500 feet of me, my home, or my workplace. Any violation will result in immediate legal action. Freya snatched the paper from my hand, her voice cracking. You can't do this. I live here. David, tell her. David can make his own choices, I replied, but you won't be making them in my house. Because yes, Freya, it's still mine. The fraudulent deed transfer was voided this afternoon. My lawyer filed an emergency motion after submitting the evidence of your crimes and financial manipulation. Gerald finally spoke, his voice trembling. Bula, please, we can work this out. We can go to counseling. We can— No, Gerald, we can't. I looked at the man I'd loved for 3 decades, the man who had shared my home, my future, my dreams. Because this isn't about midlife mistakes or drifting apart. This is about you choosing to destroy the woman who stood beside you, for someone who lies, manipulates, and profits from other people's pain. I gathered the photos and documents, sliding them neatly back into the envelope. I'll be staying at my sister's house tonight. You have 24 hours to remove your things from my home. After that, you'll be trespassing. Gerald's voice cracked. Where will I go? For the first time, he sounded small, lost. I really don't care, I said simply. Maybe Freya can share her next residence with you. I'm sure you'll work something out. As I reached the door, Freya's voice rose behind me, shrill with desperation. You think you've won? You think destroying your own family makes you strong? I turned back one last time, meeting her eyes. I didn't destroy this family, Freya. I saved what was left of it. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my sister Carol's spare bedroom, watching the sky lighten through her garden window while my phone lit up again and again, Gerald's messages, each one more frantic than the last. By 3 a.m., and the tone had shifted from apologies to anger to pathetic pleas. I deleted each one without reading past the first line. When dawn broke, I made coffee and called Marcus. "It's done," I told him when he answered. "They know about everything, the affair, the money transfers, Freya's illegal deals. Gerald's moving out today." He was quiet for a moment. His voice, when it came, was gentle. "How did they take it?" "About as well as you'd expect," I said. "But Marcus, there's something else." There was a pause on the line. "The pregnancy test," he said softly. "You know about it." I closed my eyes. "You confirmed it?" "I suspected," he replied. "Freya's been visiting a specialist in Scottsdale, Dr. Sarah Chen. I have the appointment logs for the past 3 months." My hand tightened around the coffee mug. 3 months? "Based on the frequency of visits and medical records," he continued carefully, "she's approximately 4 months along." 4 months. That meant June. June, when Gerald and I had been in marriage counseling, when he'd held my hand and promised we'd rebuild, when he'd looked me in the eyes and said we still had time to start over. He'd been comforting me, while fathering his son's wife's child. "There's more," Marcus added quietly. "Hospital records show this isn't her first pregnancy. She terminated one 2 years ago, about 6 months before she married David." The words hit like a blow to the chest. "Do the records say who?" "No," he said, "but the timing lines up. Gerald could be the father." I set down my cup before my shaking hands could drop it. This hadn't been an affair born from weakness. It had been a plan, long before the wedding, long before the lies. Freya had orchestrated everything. She'd used my son as camouflage, my husband as her financier, and my family as her ladder. "I'll need those medical records," I said finally. My voice was steady now, calm, resolved, because this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of theirs, and for the first time in a very long time, I knew exactly what I was going to do next. "They're already on their way to your lawyer," Marcus said quietly. Then, after a pause, "Bula, I have to ask, what are you planning to do with all this?" I looked out at my sister Carol's garden, the roses she'd tended for 20 years, the life she'd built with patience and honesty. "I'm going to finish what I started," I said. David called at 8 the next morning. His voice sounded hollow, as if sleep had refused to come. "Mom, can we talk? There are things I need to tell you." We met at a small diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where the coffee's always strong and the waitresses have seen enough of life not to ask questions. He sat across from me, staring into his cup, as if the dark liquid could somehow explain what had happened. "She's pregnant," he said flatly. 4 months. She told me last night after you left." I reached across the table, resting my hand over his. "I know, sweetheart." His eyes lifted, startled. "You know?" "I hired an investigator, remember? Marcus is thorough." I took a breath, steadying myself. "David, there's something else you need to hear." And then, gently, I told him everything. About the earlier pregnancy, about the medical records, about the possibility that Freya's connection with his father had begun more than 2 years ago. With each truth, I watched something inside him fade. The last traces of innocence that betrayal always takes first. "So, she never loved me," he said quietly. "Not even at the start. I was just a cover, a way to get closer to Dad." "I don't know what was in her heart," I said softly. "But I know the facts, and the facts say this was never about love." David let out a bitter laugh. "You know what's crazy? I actually talked about having kids with her. A few months ago, I said maybe we were ready, and she got angry. Said it wasn't the right time. Now I know why." His voice cracked. "She was already carrying Dad's child." The pain in his voice was almost unbearable. This was my son, gentle, loyal, kind, caught in the wreckage of two people's selfishness. "What happens now?" he asked finally. "Now," I said, "you decide the kind of life you want. One that doesn't depend on them. You're 28. You still have time to build something real with someone who truly loves you." He nodded slowly, and for the first time in days, I saw a flicker of strength return to his eyes. "As for your father," I continued, my voice quiet but firm, "he made his choices. Now he lives with them." That afternoon, I drove back to the house I'd shared with Gerald for 30 years. His car was gone, but Freya's silver Honda sat in the driveway, as if she still belonged there. The restraining order said she couldn't come within 500 feet of me, but apparently she was testing the limits. I called the police before I even stepped out of the car. Officer Martinez arrived within 10 minutes, a young woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense tone. "Ma'am, would you like to press charges?" "Yes," I said simply. "The restraining order is clear." Freya came out of the house as the officer approached, her stomach showing just enough to make her condition obvious. Maybe she thought that would stop me, that it would make me hesitate. She was wrong again. "This is harassment," Freya shouted as Officer Martinez reached for the cuffs. "I'm pregnant. You can't arrest a pregnant woman for visiting her mother-in-law." "Actually," the officer said calmly, "I can arrest you for violating a court order. Pregnancy doesn't place you above the law." As they led her to the patrol car, Freya twisted to face me one last time. "That baby is your grandchild, Bula. Gerald's child. Are you really going to let your own grandchild grow up without family?" I looked at her, this woman who had tried to take everything from me. "My grandchild," I said softly, "will have all the family it needs. Just not you." Later that evening, Gerald came home. I was waiting in the living room, surrounded by the boxes I'd packed with his things. He looked smaller somehow, older, defeated, like a man finally facing the cost of his own choices. "The police called," he said quietly, avoiding my eyes. "They said Freya was arrested. She'll be released soon, but the charges are official now. The restraining order violation and the other investigation." He sank into what had once been his favorite chair, the chair where he'd watched football on Sundays, held David as a baby, planned our retirement. "I never meant for it to go this far," he whispered. "What did you mean, Gerald?" I asked evenly. "When you started betraying our family, when you put our house in her name, when you got her pregnant while promising me we'd rebuild what we lost?" He flinched at each word. "I was confused," he stammered. "Lost. You were always so busy, always helping everyone else. And Freya made me feel young again. She made me feel important." I shook my head slowly. "Gerald," I said, my voice calm but final, "I spent 35 years putting others first, but today I finally chose myself. Patience," I said quietly. "You, David, this family, you were my purpose. The one time I tried to think about myself, my retirement, our future together, you chose to destroy it all. For a woman who was using you." "She loves me," Gerald said weakly. I reached into my bag and pulled out one final document, the last piece of truth in this long, painful puzzle. "No, Gerald," I said softly. "She doesn't." It was a transcript. Recorded conversations between Freya and the man Marcus had photographed her with, the dealer she'd been secretly meeting. Her laughter echoed through the printed words, mocking the pathetic old man who believed every lie she told, who handed over his wife's money like a trained pet. Gerald read it in silence, color draining from his face with each line. When he finally looked up, regret had replaced every trace of pride. "I've lost everything, haven't I?" he whispered. "Yes," I said simply. "You have." "What about the baby?" I stood, smoothing my skirt, ready to leave the house that was, once again, legally and rightfully mine. "That's between you and Freya," I told him, "and whatever lawyer she can still afford. I'm done cleaning up the mess you made." "Bula, please," he said, voice trembling. "We were married for 30 years. That has to count for something." I turned back to him, one final time. "It did count for something, Gerald. It counted for everything. But you threw it away for a woman who never loved you, a woman who used you to destroy your own family, who carries your child as insurance against the consequences of her own actions." I picked up my purse, the same one that had once held the envelope that changed everything. 30 years counted for everything, until you decided they counted for nothing. Now you get to live with that choice. 6 months later, I stood in my garden behind my house, watching the sunrise turn the sky to gold. The roses I'd planted years ago bloomed brighter than ever, as if the earth itself was celebrating its freedom from years of quiet poison. The legal process had been swift and fair. Freya's charges led to a plea agreement, jail time, restitution, and a public record she'd never erase. Gerald's fraudulent transfers were completely reversed. He was forced to repay every cent, plus interest and legal fees. The house, the savings, the retirement fund, everything I'd spent 35 years building was mine again. But more importantly, my life was mine again. David filed for divorce the day after Freya's arrest. It was complicated by the pregnancy, but my son showed a strength I'd never seen before. He refused to be manipulated by tears or guilt. "I can't raise a child with someone I can't trust," he told me during one of our weekly coffee meetups, "and I can't trust someone capable of what she did, to you, to Dad, to all of us." The baby, a little girl, was born in February. Gerald wanted to name her Hope, as if a single word could redeem everything that had happened. Freya chose Madison instead, and made it clear that Gerald's involvement would depend entirely on his financial support. It was poetic justice. The man who had stolen from me to fund his affair was now bound, for the next 18 years, to the very consequences he'd created. I haven't seen the baby. I've made peace with that. Perhaps one day, when she's old enough to understand the truth, we might meet, not as enemies, but as two people freed from the mistakes of others. But for now, my focus is on rebuilding, not reliving. Gerald moved into a small apartment across town, close enough to visit Madison, but far enough that I never have to see him unless I choose to. He's aged quickly, like a man carrying the full weight of his own decisions. Sometimes David mentions seeing him at the grocery store, says he looks like someone who lost a battle he started himself. I feel no joy in his downfall, but I feel no sorrow either. He made his choices, and now he lives with the price of them, a price that can never be fully repaid. The most unexpected change came in the form of Marcus Webb. What began as a professional relationship quietly grew into something deeper, something honest, something real. Marcus understood betrayal in ways few people could. His own marriage had ended when he discovered his wife's affair with his police partner. He'd turned that pain into purpose, helping others uncover the truth. We share a dark humor now, a kind of quiet wisdom about human nature, about the things people do when they think no one's watching. "You know what I love about you?" he told me over dinner last week, in the same Italian restaurant where all of this had begun. "You didn't let them break you. You got angry. You got justice, but you never let them make you bitter." He was right. It took time, but I realized I wasn't broken. I was lighter, like I'd finally set down a weight I didn't know I'd been carrying. The future I'd once imagined, the travels, the quiet retirement, the familiar comfort, had been replaced with something better. I started volunteering at a free clinic downtown, using my nursing skills to help people who couldn't afford care. I joined a new book club, one that actually discusses books instead of gossip, and for the first time in decades, I feel alive again. I'd learned how to cook for one without feeling lonely, how to make choices without asking anyone's permission, how to sleep through the night without waiting for someone else's breathing beside me. At 58, I finally discovered what it meant to live for myself. David had moved into a small house just 10 minutes away, close enough for our weekly dinners, but far enough that we both had space to heal. He'd started dating again, cautiously this time, with eyes open to every red flag he'd once ignored. The woman he'd been seeing for the past 2 months was a teacher named Rebecca, gentle, thoughtful, and kind. "She's nothing like Freya," he told me one evening with a small smile. She pays for her own dinners. She doesn't expect gifts. She just likes me. It was a low bar, but it was progress. That morning, as I trimmed the roses that had finally returned to life, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Through the garden gate, I saw Marcus's old truck pull into the driveway, and despite myself, I smiled. He'd made a habit of bringing me coffee on weekend mornings, not because I needed him to, but because he wanted to, because it made both of us happy in a quiet, uncomplicated way. "Morning, beautiful," he called, stepping through the gate with 2 paper cups in hand. "How are the roses?" "Spectacular," I said, accepting the coffee with a grin. "I think they're as happy to be free of the drama as I am." We sat together on the porch swing Gerald had built years ago, back when he'd still been the man I thought I'd married. I'd considered removing it once, along with everything else that reminded me of him, but I changed my mind. This was my house now, my porch, my swing, and I refused to let his betrayal ruin the good memories that had nothing to do with him. "Any word from your lawyer about Freya's appeal?" Marcus asked after a moment. "Denied," I said, taking a sip of coffee. "She'll serve the full 18 months. He chuckled. "Judge Patterson doesn't play favorites, especially not with people who prey on families." "Good thing I didn't know that when I hired you," I teased. "I might have been tempted to take justice into my own hands." Marcus smiled. "You did take justice into your own hands. You just did it legally and completely. Honestly, it was kind of beautiful, in a terrifying way." I laughed softly, leaning back against the swing. The morning sun felt warm on my face. "You know what's strange?" I said. "I'm grateful it happened." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Grateful?" "Not for the betrayal," I said quickly. "Not for the pain, but grateful that I found out the truth before I wasted any more years living a lie. Grateful that I learned I'm stronger than I ever thought I was, and grateful that I discovered the difference between being alone and being lonely." I gestured toward the garden, vibrant and alive again, toward the home that was finally peaceful. If Gerald had been a better liar, or if Freya had been smarter at hiding her tracks, I might have spent the rest of my life with people who never truly loved me. Instead, I'm 58 years old, and for the first time, I know what it feels like to be valued for who I am, not what I can provide. I reached for Marcus's hand. It felt easy, simple, the way care is supposed to feel when it's real. "I'm grateful for that knowledge," I said, "even if it came at a terrible price." He squeezed my hand gently. "So, what happens next?" I thought for a moment, looking out at the morning light spilling over the garden, my garden, and the life that stretched ahead like a blank page. For 30 years, I said, my future belonged to someone else's choices, someone else's dreams. Now, it's mine. Marcus smiled. "And what will you do with it?" "Next," I said simply, "I live. I wake up every morning in a house that belongs to me. I make choices that make me happy, and I never again mistake someone's need for me as proof of their love." "That," Marcus said softly, "sounds like the best plan I've ever heard." "It is," I agreed, watching a pair of cardinals weave a nest together in the oak tree Gerald once wanted to cut down. It was ironic, really. The same tree he saw as a problem was now a symbol of everything that had survived him. As the sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace, not the fragile peace that depends on someone else's approval, but the kind that comes from truth, closure, and self-respect. The envelope that started everything was long gone now. Its contents had served their purpose. The documents were filed, the photos sealed in evidence. The truth had been told. Justice had been done. What remained was this: a woman who'd learned that betrayal doesn't have to define you forever. That trust, once broken, can be rebuilt. With the right people. That love, real love, is possible again. Even after everything you thought love was has crumbled away. At 58, I finally discovered who I was when I wasn't busy being who everyone else needed me to be. And it turned out to be the most beautiful discovery of my life.